They asked me to wait outside. Not rudely. That's the thing I keep coming back to, it wasn't rude. My Uncle Reggie simply looked up from the head of the table, where he'd arranged himself with the particular authority of a man who believes rooms belong to him, and said, "Mirabel, we'll call you in when we need you." Like I was an appointment. Like I was the plumber, waiting in the hallway while the real people discussed real things. I looked at my mother. She looked at her hands. I looked at my brother Felix. He was checking his phone. I looked at my Aunt Constance, who had flown in specifically for this meeting, and who met my eyes for exactly 1 second before finding something fascinating about the far wall. I stood up. I took my coffee. I walked out of the room and I closed the door behind me with the kind of careful quietness that costs more than slamming it. I sat in the hallway of my family's home, a home I had been inside 10,000 times, a home that had my height measured in pencil marks on a kitchen doorframe from when I was 4 years old, and I waited. And while I waited, I thought about the number. The number that was sitting, quietly and without announcement, in a holding account that my family knew nothing about. I thought about that number for a long time. Let me tell you about my family, because they are not monsters, and I need you to understand that. Monsters are easier. You can leave monsters without guilt, without the complicated grief of loving people who have consistently failed to see you. My family is warm. Genuinely warm in the way of people who love each other loudly and well, and have simply, over many years, arranged their love in a hierarchy that nobody ever formally declared, but everyone silently understood. At the top, my Uncle Reginald, who built the family business, a property development company, regional, profitable, respected, from a single site in the early 90s. The business is his origin story, and he tells it at every gathering, and everyone listens every time as if it's new because the telling of it is part of what holds everything together. Below him, my father Winston, his younger brother, who joined the business in its second year and has been its operational backbone ever since. My father is not a man of vision. He would tell you that himself, without self-pity, but he is a man of execution, and without him the vision would have remained a vision. My mother Pauline, who is clever in the way of people who have learned to apply their intelligence in directions that don't threaten anyone. She manages the family's administrative and legal affairs with a thoroughness that I inherited and that neither of us has ever been properly credited for. My brother Felix, 29, currently heading up the sales division of the family company after 3 years of being mentored by Reginald in the conspicuous, deliberate way of a man preparing a successor. And then me, Mirabel, 31, senior auditor at a firm that has nothing to do with the family business, which was my first act of quiet rebellion at 22, and which my family has spent 9 years pretending is a temporary arrangement before I come to my senses and join the company. I am not going to join the company, but I'll come to that. The meeting was about the business expansion. Reginald had been talking for 2 years about taking the company into a new region, more sites, larger developments, a different scale of operation entirely. It was a real opportunity. I knew that because I had done the analysis, privately, in the evenings, with the specific obsessive thoroughness that I apply to things nobody has asked me to look at, but that I cannot help examining. The expansion required capital, more than the business currently had accessible. They needed an investor external, or from within the family, or some combination. This was the purpose of the meeting. This was what was being discussed on the other side of the door I had been asked to wait outside of. I want to be precise about what I knew and what I didn't. I didn't know, sitting in that hallway, exactly what was being said. I didn't have the specific details of the proposal on the table or the number they'd identified as the gap. What I did know was this: 18 months earlier, I had begun quietly investing, not in the family business, in the property sector adjacent to it. I had identified, through the kind of careful, patient, unglamorous analysis that is my particular gift, a development opportunity in the exact region Reginald had been eyeing. I had structured my investment through a holding company. My solicitor, a meticulous woman called Ria, had helped me set it up properly, because I understood instinctively that money held quietly is money held safely. I had not told my family, not out of deception or not primarily, but because I had learned, over 31 years, that things I built were treated as family assets before I had finished building them. That my ideas, shared too early, became other people's ideas by the time they landed. That in my family, Mirabel's contributions were infrastructure, necessary, invisible, absorbed without acknowledgement into the structure that everyone else got credit for standing on. So I had built this quietly, the way I built everything that mattered. And now I was sitting in the hallway with my coffee going cold, waiting to be called in, while they figured out how to close a gap that I could close tomorrow. You want to know what the hallway felt like? I can tell you. It felt like being 12 years old and finishing a school project that I'd spent 3 weeks on, a business proposal, ironically, some class exercise, and bringing it home and showing my father, who looked at it carefully and said, "This is good, Mirabel. You should show Uncle Reginald." And showing Reginald, who looked at it and said, "Felix, come and look at this. This is the kind of thinking you should be developing." And watching Felix look at my project for 45 seconds and receiving the praise that had transferred from me to him in the time it took Reginald to redirect his attention. Felix was 10. He had not made the project. He had looked at the project. That's what the hallway felt like, the same as it had always felt, a waiting room, a place I inhabited between being needed and being noticed, which were not the same thing in my family and never had been. They called me, and after 40 minutes. I want you to notice that. 40 minutes. I sat in the hallway of my family home for 40 minutes while they made decisions about a business that my father had given 27 years to, and that I had spent 18 months quietly positioning myself adjacent to. Reginald spoke. He said they had identified the opportunity and the gap, and that they were exploring options. He said they had been in conversation with 2 external investors and that things were progressing. He said this warmly, with the genuine affection of a man who sees himself as benevolent, that they wanted me to know what was happening because family should be kept informed. Informed, not consulted, not included, informed. My mother had a particular expression she wore in these moments. I can only describe it as careful, like she was carrying a full glass and concentrating on not spilling it. My father said, "We know this isn't really your area, love." Not your area. I had spent 9 years as a senior auditor. I had spent 18 months doing sector analysis that Reginald's external investors would have charged 6 figures for. I had a holding company with a site in the exact region they were trying to enter. Not your area. I said, "I understand. Thank you for keeping me in the loop." I picked up my bag. I said goodbye to everyone warmly and individually. I hugged my mother. I told Felix his new car was nice because it was. I shook Reginald's hand. And I left. The drive home was 40 minutes. I did not listen to music. I just drove and let the thing settle in my chest and tried to identify what it actually was. Not rage. Rage would have been simpler, and I've never been a simple feeler. It was something closer to clarity. The specific clarity of a moment when the thing you've always half known becomes fully known, and there's nowhere left to put the half anymore. They had asked me to wait outside of a conversation I was already inside of, financially, in ways they couldn't imagine. The gap they were trying to close with external investors, I could close it. I had the means, the analysis, the structural setup. I had been adjacent to this for 18 months without knowing that's what I was doing, and now I knew, and the question was what I was going to do with that knowledge. I drove and I thought. I thought for the whole 40 minutes. By the time I pulled up outside my flat, I had made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not a revenge scheme, just a quiet, clear, fully formed decision about how I was going to proceed. I was going to do nothing, for now. I was going to let the external investor conversations continue. I was going to stay in my lane that they thought was nowhere near theirs, and I was going to keep building. Quietly, thoroughly, the way I had always built. And I was going to wait. Here is what I did in the following 14 months. I consolidated my position in the holding company. With Ria's guidance, I expanded the scope, acquired an additional interest in a site that sat directly adjacent to the development Reginald had been eyeing, which I had been monitoring for 8 months, and which had just become available at a price that rewarded patience. I retained a development consultant, a woman named Odette, recommended by Ria, who had 20 years in the sector and the specific quality of saying difficult true things without apology, to stress-test the investment strategy. She told me 2 things that were hard to hear and 4 things that confirmed I'd been right. I adjusted for the 2. I built on the 4. I did not attend 3 of the 4 family gatherings that year. Not dramatically. I always had a reason, a genuine one, because my life was full now in ways that made genuine reasons easy to come by. I sent gifts for birthdays. I called my mother on Sundays. I was present in the ways that cost me nothing and absent in the ways that cost me everything. The family noticed the absence. I know because my mother mentioned it twice, in the careful way she mentioned things she wanted me to hear without wanting to be the one saying them. "We don't see enough of you, Mirabel. Reginald asked after you." Reginald asked after me. I received that information, and I filed it in the same place I filed everything, the place where I kept the long view. The call came on a Wednesday morning. My father, which was unusual. My mother was the caller. My father was the one who occasionally got on the line for the last 2 minutes. For him to be the first voice meant something had shifted. He said, "The external investor conversations have fallen through. Both of them. Reginald he's not panicking, but it's not good. The timeline is compromised, and we need to find a solution quickly or we lose the opportunity." I listened. He said, "I know this isn't your area, love, but you know people. You work with people who know about these things. I just thought if you had any contacts who might." He trailed off. I sat with the phone for a moment. 9 years of not your area, 40 minutes in a hallway. A table I'd been kept away from while they made decisions that I had, unknowingly and then knowingly, been perfectly positioned to influence. I said, "Let me make some calls." Not, "I am your investor." Not, "I have been sitting on this for 14 months. Just let me make some calls." Because the moment wasn't ready yet. And I had learned, across a lifetime of being the one who was patient while everyone else moved, that timing is its own kind of power. I called Ria. I told her the situation. She already knew most of it. She knew my position, the sites, the holding company, the strategy. She asked me one question: "What do you want the outcome to look like?" I thought about it carefully, and I told her. Not revenge, not a scene, not the moment where I walk into the room and everyone understands at once that they misjudged me. Those were the fantasies of an earlier version of me, the one who'd sat in hallways and believed that recognition, when it came, would come with fanfare. I wanted a fair transaction, properly structured. Arm's length where it needed to be arm's length and family where it could afford to be. I wanted my holding company to take the investment position, and I wanted that position documented and valued correctly, and I wanted my father and Reginald to understand, clearly and without ambiguity, what they were looking at. Ria said, "I'll draw up a term sheet." I let Ria deliver it. That was deliberate. I didn't walk it in myself, didn't sit at the table while they read it, didn't watch their faces when they reached the name of the holding company and Ria explained who stood behind it. I let the document do what documents do. I let it sit in the room without me. My father called that evening. He was very quiet in the way of a man processing something that has rearranged the furniture of his understanding. He said, "Mirabel, this holding company." I said, "Yes." He said, "How long?" I said, 18 months before the meeting, a little longer before that in a different form. Silence. He said, "You were in the hallway." I said, "I was in the hallway." Another silence, longer. He said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." I meant it without cruelty. He hadn't known because I hadn't told him. And I hadn't told him because I had learned, across 31 years of pencil marks on door frames and projects that became Felix's lessons and hallways outside important rooms. That the things I built needed to be fully built before I handed them to anyone. He asked if I would come to a meeting, a proper one, at the table. I said, yes, have Ria send the details. The meeting was on a Thursday. I sat at the table. My name was on the document in front of everyone. Reginald read it twice. I watched him read it twice. And when he looked up, his expression had the quality of a man who has walked into a room he thought he knew and found it arranged differently than he remembered. He said, "You've been thorough." I said, "I try to be." He said, and I think he meant it, "I think it was genuine. I underestimated you." I said, "I know." Not "it's fine," not "don't worry about it." Just "I know." A simple agreement with a true statement, the same as I'd been making all my life, but now from a different position entirely. We agreed terms, fair ones. Ria had made sure of that. The transaction closed 6 weeks later. The wall. The one in my parents' hallway that I'm sure my family has a version of the arrangement of pride, the exhibition of who counts. I thought about that on the drive home from the meeting. Not bitterly. Just with the particular tenderness you feel toward the things that hurt you when you were young and that you've finally outgrown. I had not outgrown my family. I want to be clear about that. I went at Christmas. I called my mother on Sundays. I sat at tables and passed dishes and laughed at stories I'd heard before. I was present. I was just present differently, not waiting for permission, not auditioning for a seat I already owned. Felix called me a few weeks after the transaction closed. He asked if we could have lunch, just us. He sounded uncertain, in a way I hadn't heard from him before. We had lunch. He asked questions about how I'd built the position, what I'd seen, how I'd known. Real questions, curious ones. The questions of someone who was starting to understand that the room was larger than he'd been shown. I answered them honestly, not to teach him a lesson, just because they were good questions and he was my brother and I had spent enough years being in rooms alone. I drove home after that lunch, and I sat in my car for a moment. Not processing, not replaying, just present in the specific fullness of someone who has finished carrying something heavy and hasn't yet picked up the next thing. I thought about Reginald's voice. "We'll call you in when we need you." They had needed me before they knew they needed me. They had needed me while I was in the hallway. They had needed me for 18 months before that conversation, before that meeting, before the document that Ria delivered to a table I hadn't been invited to. I had been exactly where I needed to be the whole time. They just hadn't thought to look. I got out of the car, went inside, put the kettle on, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, completely, quietly, entirely at home in the life I had built while no one was watching.